everybody, and welcome to the boathouse, Le Chateau de Bateau, as it's referred to around these parts. There are really three steps to any project, any exploration. One of them is to plan your workspace, and I want to talk about that. And then you gather your materials and prepare them, and then you assemble. Those are the three steps. Number one in planning your workspace for these crafts is you've got to figure out, now I'm here, I've got a surface that is okay to work on, to poke holes in. It's just an old piece of plywood that's a table. If you don't have that at home or at school, you might have something else. But here's something that it's just an ordinary run-of-the-mill cutting board from our kitchen that we use, but it can also be used as a workspace in your home, and you can use that for doing the kinds of things that you're doing if you're cutting or that sort of thing. Secondly, when you're planning your workspace or planning your exploration, you need to identify where you're going to go if something goes wrong. And in this case, we're going to be using tools. I'm going to talk a bit about tools, but if you're using tools, any tool that's worth its salt, if it's doing something like a cutting tool, it's no good if it's not sharp. And it's sharp, it works really well to do what it's supposed to do, but if you're not careful, it can cut you too. So what I'd like you to do is figure out to whom you're going to turn if you accidentally poke yourself with a needle. And of course, just thinking about the kinds of things that can go wrong is one way of ensuring that they won't go wrong. But you might cut yourself with a knife if you're using that along the way, or you might stick yourself with a needle. You might fall over. I will say that the place to do your work, if there are lots of you working on the similar projects at the same time, sometimes that becomes a factor that you've got to think about. For example, if you're sharing tools and somebody's getting impatient and they grab the tool, they might end up grabbing the wrong end, whether it's a pair of scissors and people could get cut. For example, if you need a Band-Aid, who are you going to turn to? Have you got a mom and dad or a teacher, or do you know where the first aid kit is? Those kinds of things. And that's on any exploration that you're doing. You should be able to do that. Thirdly, in the planning your workspace, let's talk about tools. There's a tool. It's a knife from Pictou, Nova Scotia. That is a wonderful knife that folds. It's been with me on many, many expeditions around the world, but it's very, very, very sharp. And the reason why it's sharp is because it's a knife. But I'm very aware that this can hurt me. So I'm going to be very careful when I bring it out. Same thing for you. If you have tools, make sure that you're checked out on using them. If your teacher has set up stations, please pay attention to that. But a tool is no use if you don't keep it sharp and look after it. But that's absolutely important. Now, raw materials that we have here. Each of you will have got somewhere, I hope, your Science Rendezvous Kingston bag. We printed up a lot of these last year for the 2020 version of Science Rendezvous, the 10th anniversary that, of course, got canceled because of the pandemic. But we're using these 2020 bags for the 2021 virtual Science Rendezvous. And inside these bags, which you will have got either from Science Rendezvous or from the library, are 9 items. So I'm dumping them out here. And these are the resources that we're going to have for using for our thing. 9 things. In no particular order, there is the knotting rope with which we're going to do the Turk's head knot. We've got a stick for the ayagak, part of the Inuit toy that we're going to make. We've got a piece of pipe, and you'll notice that piece of pipe has a little hole in it, a little hole right there. You've got some kind of lanyard, leather lanyard. That's lanyard meaning a line that was cut from scraps of leather. You've got some sinew, which is artificial sinew, but it's very like the kind of sinew that you would get that would be maybe out of the tendon of a caribou or a reindeer. And it's wonderful for sewing, but you've got about 3 meters of that rolled up. It's waxed, so it's sort of sticky. You've got a piece of birch bark. All of you have got a beautiful piece of birch bark in your kit somewhere that was collected in the woods near Sealy's Bay where I live. And the last two items are you've got a patch of either deer skin or moose hide that is cut specially to make our bag of possibles. And of course, in that skin, as you will see right here, is a needle that we will be able to use along the line. So that's our resources as we go along. There's material here for all of the activities that we're doing. I'm just going to keep because we're going to start with the bag of possibles, I'm going to keep the leather, I'm going to keep the lanyard, I'm going to keep the sinew, and everything else I'm going to set aside. Preparing the materials. Your piece of leather. Well, the first thing you need to realize is that your piece of leather has probably two sides. And in this case, this side is more like shoe leather. It's smooth. That's the outside of the leather. The inside of the leather is soft. It's suede. And you get to decide which side you'd like your bag of possibles to have. Do you want to have the smooth on the outside, in which case you'll fold it in half that way, and it's smooth on both sides. In my case, I think what I want to do is I want to have my suede on the outside, that smooth part on the outside. Keep track of your needle. That's important. Either put it somewhere where you know where it is, or you can even just stick it in your clothing like that sometimes. That may help keep your needle. These are what are called darning needles or utility needles. They have quite a big hole so that the sinew can go through. So the first item of business is we're going to prepare our piece of leather. And for that, you're going to need a straight edge and a pen. So the first thing you want to do is we want to put some guidelines on our piece of leather. And that involves putting a line just a few millimeters from the edge, because that's going to be a guideline for stitching on three sides. And on the top, remember that we're making, there's the original bag of possibles that I looked at. On the top, we're going to make these belt loops. And in the inside, we're going to do stitching. So we need to figure out where we're going to do that. So the first item of business is to just get a few centimeters off the edge. Whoops. And draw yourself a line that can be used to follow when the time comes to do the stitching. Okay. Now, so this is going to be a sewn side. This will be folded together. It's a sewn line, and that is a sewn line. So three sides that we're going to sew. The top line is actually the top of where those belt loops are going to be. So I'm going to put another line about a centimeter away down here. And that is going to be a help. Maybe while I'm here, what I'll do is you can draw in by hand the lines for the belt loops. And you can see what I'm doing here. I'm making a kind of a ladder along the way. Just kind of, they don't have to be exact. Now the holes you're going to make for the needle to go through, they are going to be quite a bit more exact. Now you think, okay, I'm going to sew up some leather. Now in some cases, I think some of you may be able to put your needle through the leather without any trouble. And but others of you, and this is really about exploration projects, quite often what you think you're doing is really not the most challenging part of the problem. So we're making a bag of possibles. How hard could it be to sew up things? Well, it turns out it's pretty hard. Now, can I put this right through there? Yeah, I can force that through there. And I could probably sew not too badly doing that by pushing the leather against the needle. But what I'm going to suggest is that you're going to need to find another tool. And part of the exercise here is to be resourceful and find the tools you need. So if your needle is not going to go through the leather very easily, you want to look around the house to see what else you can find. Now, in our house, we've got a bit of a workshop. There's an awl, a hand awl. It's just a pointy thing that looks like a screwdriver that makes a pretty dandy hole. And just one. There's a compass that I have for measuring maps in my studio when I'm planning trips. It turns out it's got quite a pointy end on that. You may have something like that in your house that makes a nice sharp hole there. So those are two things that make holes. If you have some fine scissors, now this is not the way you use scissors, but there's a sharp point that could be used as well to make a hole that would work. Another idea for making a hole is to get a nail. There's just a finishing nail, and you could use that with a little hammer to make a hole, which is pretty easy to do. You might have a nail file. Another thing you can do to make holes with a nail is if you happen to have a pliers or a pair of vice grips, you can actually set those down. You've got to figure out how to make a hole. If you've got a leather worker in your house, you might have a tool like this that is actually the tool that I use to make the holes that your needle went through. This actually makes 4 holes at a time, which is pretty cool. By just squeezing it together, you can make 4 holes at a time. So you need to make even stitch holes just a few centimeters apart, about the same, a few millimeters apart, the same way that you have done, we have done down here. And we can make holes all the way around. So why don't we just if you want to pause the video, you can stop and make your holes all the way around. Now, once you get your holes all the way around, we have to do the next step, which is a little bit delicate, but it is to cut these belt loops. And in this case, what I want to do is I'm going to use an X-Acto knife, but there are other things you can use as well. So there's one belt loop that I'm cutting, and if you look at it, I'm going to be coming in. There's a little belt loop there, and eventually that's going to have a piece of lanyard that goes through it. What else can you use to cut those belt loops? Well, you could use a pair of scissors. If you fold that neatly in half, you can use your scissors like this. That's a similar kind of cut. Sometimes it's hard to make the scissor cut all the way down, but you can do that like that. Other things that I have around here to cut, if you've got something like that, a small chisel. That small chisel is a way of getting in to cut your belt loops. 1, 2. Well, I'll leave it up to you to figure out how to cut your belt loops, but by all means be very careful as you go forward. You may need some help to do that. So we get all our holes figured out, and there's my piece of leather. And in order to do the sewing, it's time to get at the sinew. So I think you've got about 3 meters of sinew, so you want to undo it And then you want to actually fold it into 3. There. I've made 3 roughly equal parts. And I'm going to cut one of those 3 parts with my scissors. And here's the really, really neat thing about sinew, artificial or real, whether it's from an animal or not. What you can do is you can split the sinew, and you can not use the full thickness of it to do your sewing. So there I've split, there's a chunk of sinew there and a chunk of sinew there that's a bit thinner. You can then thread your needle like that. A little bit left over. See that hanging down? And then on the other end, what I'd suggest you do is you tie a little knot in the end and trim off the extra with your scissors. And at that point, it's time, once the belt loops are cut, once the holes are made all the way around for your sewing, it's time to assemble your bag of possibles. My first stitch. There we go. Now I've made a mistake already. Remember I said I wanted the suede on the outside? In order for this to work, I have to have the suede on the inside. So I'm going to see my lines here. And it's at that point I'm going to start lining up my holes. I'm going to do a double, come to the knot. I'm going to do a double stitch at the beginning. Now you can, so there, that's going to be my bag. There it is. Now you can stitch on the outside as I've done there, gone around the outside. And there's another stitch. And you'll find if your holes are nice and even on both sides, there's another hole and there it comes through. You just sew away. And I'm sewing on the outside. You could actually go up and down along the line that you've made. But there we are. I'm just going to sew with my, and because those holes are nice and even along there that I've made, and they're just big enough for the needle, I don't want to double thread because I've chosen the thickness of sinew that I want. Yeah, there we go. Another stitch. And I'm just studying those up tight enough to make a nice seam. So I'm probably going to speed ahead on the video so that you don't have to watch me doing this while you're waiting. You'll get the drift of what's going on. I'm going to sew around the edge of the leather. The leather is surprisingly strong. This is deer hide that is chrome tanned. It's soaked in material that is like a preservative and then dried. You can also tan leather with brains of animals. You can tan leather with salt. You can tan leather with the bark of a hemlock tree. All of the leather that we use pretty well for any kind of garment or backpack or anything is all that's called tanning. The tannins preserve the leather. All right, so I'm going to come along the bottom now. Yeah, so that's us sewing up the bag of possibles. Sac de Tumette, as my Ingrid said. Whoops. Caught around the corner. There we go. So I'm coming to the end and I'm starting to think about what am I going to do at the end with the thread. I don't make sure it doesn't want to be doubled. So this is lovely work. You can sort of think when you're doing it. I love doing handwork. It helps me think about other things like what might I put in this? What are some of my good luck things that I might want to put in New bag of possibles. What kind of essentials am I going to put in there? And all right, so I've come to the last hole. And so what I'm going to do, there's the last hole right there. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go back through some of these other holes as a way of locking the sinew. So I'm coming back maybe 4 or 5 holes. And so I'll pull it tight. And when I'm finished, I'll just snip that off right there. And what I can do now is I can then go and have a look at my belt loops. There are my belt loops. There's one. There's a belt loop. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick up my belt loop. Oh, I forgot to do something. There's my bag of possibles, but it's got all that rough sewing on the outside, and I want my suede on the inside. So what I'll do is I'll turn the whole thing inside out, or right side out as it may be, pushing my fingers down into the corners. And there we go. We've got a lovely little leather bag to keep some treasures in. And then it's just a matter of taking your leather lanyard and putting it through the belt loops. 1, 2, there we are. And I'm going to pull it through so it's sort of equal on either end. And when I cinch those up, it becomes my new bag of possibles, your new bag of possibles that you can put over your head and around your neck with your treasures. Voila.